Some lives are saved by doctors. Some by soldiers. And once in a while, a life is saved by someone the world refuses to trust. In the spring of 1888, deep within the Arizona Territory, one Apache woman walked into the mountains carrying nothing more than a medicine pouch, a hunting knife, and the knowledge her father had spent a lifetime teaching her. She never imagined those lessons would soon decide whether a complete stranger lived or died. The first light of dawn crept through the towering ponderosa pines. Cool air drifted along Eagle Creek. The snow had melted only weeks earlier, leaving the mountain streams full and the forests alive again. Wildflowers pushed through the rocky soil. Birdsong echoed between the cliffs. To most people, it was simply another beautiful morning. To Naya, it was another day of work. She moved quietly through the forest with practiced confidence. 25 years old. Strong without appearing intimidating. Graceful without wasting a single movement. Her long black hair rested in two neat braids. A buckskin dress decorated with turquoise beadwork brushed softly against the tops of her boots. A worn leather satchel hung across her shoulder. Inside were dried herbs, willow bark, pine resin, clean linen strips, and several small bundles of roots carefully wrapped in cloth. Nothing inside had been purchased. Everything had been gathered by hand. Years earlier, her father had taught her every plant that healed, every root that poisoned, every stream that remained safe during drought, and every trail the wildlife preferred. He often told her, "The mountain speaks before danger arrives." Most people simply don't know how to listen. After he passed away, those lessons became the only inheritance he left behind. And Naya honored them every single day. A small cabin stood beside Eagle Creek. It wasn't large. One room. A stone fireplace. A wooden table. Shelves lined with glass jars filled with dried plants. Outside, several bundles of herbs hung beneath the porch roof to dry in the spring breeze. People rarely visited unless they truly needed help. Some Apache families traveled for miles seeking her medicine. Occasionally, even settlers from Cedar Ridge appeared at her door. Usually after every other option had failed. They seldom thanked her openly. But they always returned when someone they loved became sick. Naya never asked why. Healing didn't require approval. Only compassion. Nearly 15 miles away, the town of Cedar Ridge had already awakened. Blacksmith hammers rang across Main Street. Wagons rolled through the dusty roads. Children hurried toward the schoolhouse. Inside Miller's general store, several ranchers gathered around the potbelly stove. Their conversation centered on the same problem everyone had been discussing for weeks. Another mountain lion attack. 3 calves had disappeared. One horse returned with deep claw marks across its flank. Ranchers were beginning to worry. If somebody doesn't deal with that cat, it'll start coming closer to town. One man nodded. Already has. The storekeeper glanced toward the window. Walker accepted the job. Several heads turned. Ethan Walker. No one questioned his ability. At 34, he had earned a reputation as one of the most capable trackers in the territory. He hunted only when necessary. Never for trophies. Never for sport. Only when livestock, or people, were genuinely threatened. He preferred working alone. Some called it confidence. Others called it stubbornness. Perhaps it was both. Outside, Ethan adjusted the saddle on his bay gelding. His weathered rifle rested securely in a leather scabbard. A coil of rope hung beside his bedroll. He checked each piece of equipment twice. Old habits saved lives. Sheriff Owen Carter stepped onto the boardwalk. "You sure you don't want another man with you?" Ethan smiled faintly. One rider leaves fewer tracks. The lion won't hear me coming. The sheriff folded his arms. It isn't the cat I'm worried about. Ethan raised an eyebrow. The mountains? The weather? Both. A storm was expected within 2 days. Nothing unusual. But mountain weather often ignored predictions. Ethan climbed into the saddle. I'll be back before then. The sheriff watched him ride away. I hope so. By midday, Naya had filled nearly half her satchel. She carefully knelt beside a patch of yarrow growing beneath scattered pines. The white blossoms would help stop bleeding. Nearby, she collected wild sage. Then several strands of mountain mint. As she reached for another plant, something unusual caught her attention. A raven circled overhead. Once. Twice. Then landed silently on a dead cedar. It didn't fly away. It simply watched the valley below. Naya slowly stood. Her expression changed. Ravens rarely gathered without reason. She walked toward the rocky slope. The forest became strangely quiet. No squirrels. No birds. Even the breeze seemed to disappear. Then she saw it. A single drop of fresh blood. Bright red. Resting on a flat gray stone. She crouched immediately. Another drop. Then another. The trail continued downhill. Not an animal. The stride was too long. Too uneven. Human. Someone had been injured. Recently. Naya adjusted the strap across her shoulder. Without hesitation. She followed the blood. Nearly half an hour passed. The trail grew heavier. Broken branches. Boot prints dragging across loose gravel. Scattered horse tracks. Then. Silence. She stepped around a cluster of boulders. Her heart sank. A chestnut horse wandered nearby without its rider. The saddle hung crooked. One stirrup had snapped. Several yards away, a man lay motionless beneath the base of a rocky cliff. His rifle rested several feet beyond his reach. Blood soaked through the left leg of his trousers. One shoulder sat unnaturally high. Deep claw marks tore across the back of his jacket. Naya rushed forward. She knelt beside him. Checked his breathing. Slow. But steady. His pulse. Weak. She carefully examined the wounds. The cuts across his back were fresh. Too narrow for a bear. Too deep for tree branches. Mountain lion. The animal had attacked from behind. He had escaped. Barely. But the fall had nearly finished what the lion started. His left shoulder was completely dislocated. The wound in his thigh continued bleeding. His skin had already turned pale. Naya pressed clean linen firmly against the injury. Fresh blood soaked through almost immediately. Too much. Far too much. She opened her medicine pouch. Quickly. Precisely. Every movement practiced hundreds of times. Crushed yarrow. Pine resin. A clean pressure bandage. She wrapped the wound tightly. The bleeding finally began to slow. Next came the shoulder. She positioned one hand beneath his elbow. The other against his shoulder blade. One controlled movement. A sharp click echoed softly. The joint slipped back into place. The unconscious hunter groaned. His breathing became steadier. Naya finally looked at his face. She recognized him. Ethan Walker. The tracker from Cedar Ridge. They had crossed paths twice before. Neither conversation had lasted longer than a minute. Now. His life rested entirely in her hands. She glanced toward the sky. The afternoon sun had already begun dropping behind the western ridge. Night would arrive quickly. If Ethan remained here, the cold alone could kill him before sunrise. She looked around. No wagons. No riders. No help. Only endless forest. She couldn't carry a grown man. But she could drag him. Working quickly, she cut several young pine poles, bound them together with leather straps from her pack. Then stretched Ethan's blanket across the frame. A simple rescue sled. Just as her father had once taught her. She carefully lifted Ethan onto it. Fastened him securely. Wrapped another blanket around his body. Then gripped the front rope with both hands. The cabin was nearly 4 miles away. Every step would be uphill. She leaned forward. The sled moved. Slowly. 1 foot at a time. The mountain seemed endless. But stopping was never an option. As shadows stretched across the forest floor, a low growl rolled through the trees. Naya froze. Not because she was frightened. Because she recognized the sound instantly. The mountain lion had come back. The mountain lion growled again. Closer this time. Naya slowly released the rope tied to the rescue sled. Every instinct urged her to keep dragging Ethan toward the cabin. But panic had no place in the wilderness. Her father had once told her, when a predator believes you are running, it stops thinking. It only chases. She refused to become prey. Without making a sound, she knelt beside Ethan. His breathing remained shallow. The bandage around his thigh was already stained with fresh blood. Moving him too quickly could reopen the wound. Leaving him where he was would almost certainly cost his life. She looked toward the trees. The forest had become unnaturally quiet. Even the ravens had disappeared. Only one sound remained. The slow crunch of something heavy stepping through dry pine needles. Naya carefully pulled Ethan's rifle from the ground. She checked it. 3 cartridges remained. She placed the weapon beside the sled. Not in her hands. Her father had taught her that a rifle should always be the final answer. Not the first. Instead, she searched the forest floor. Several fallen pine branches. Dry bark. Sticky pine resin. A bundle of dead sagebrush. Enough. Working quickly, she built a small fire 20 yards away from the sled. Not large enough to spread. Just enough to create light. Then she added pine resin. Thick white smoke rose immediately. The breeze carried the scent downhill. Exactly where she wanted it. Moments later, amber eyes appeared between the trees. The mountain lion. Large. Lean. Its tawny coat blended almost perfectly with the rocks behind it. The animal stood silently. Watching. Its ears stayed forward. Its tail moved slowly from side to side. It wasn't preparing to attack. It was deciding. Naya never looked directly into its eyes. She stood tall. Raised both arms slowly. Made herself appear larger. The lion took one cautious step forward. She reached into the fire. Lifted a burning branch. Not threatening. Not waving it wildly. Simply holding it where the animal could see. The mountain lion hesitated. Smoke drifted between them. For several long seconds. Neither moved. Finally, the lion blinked. Turned. And disappeared into the pines without making another sound. Naya didn't celebrate. Wild animals often returned. She immediately pulled the rescue sled into a narrow gap between 2 massive boulders. Only one direction remained open. If the lion came back, it couldn't circle behind them. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. Night settled over Eagle Creek. The temperature dropped rapidly. The mountain air became cold enough to steal warmth from an injured body within hours. Naya fed several more pieces of wood into the fire. Then returned to Ethan. His forehead burned beneath her hand. Too hot. Fever. She gently unwrapped the bandage around his thigh. The wound looked cleaner than before. But inflammation had begun. She crushed willow bark into warm water. Mixed it with powdered yarrow and several leaves of mountain sage. The smell filled the narrow shelter between the rocks. Carefully, she cleaned the wound again. Applied fresh medicine. Then wrapped clean linen around the injury. Not too tight. Not too loose. Exactly enough pressure to control the bleeding while allowing blood to reach the damaged tissue. Her father had insisted on perfection. Medicine is patient. Injury is not. She whispered those words to herself as she worked. Hours passed. The fire crackled softly. Outside, coyotes called somewhere far down the valley. Ethan tossed restlessly beneath the blankets. His lips moved. Words escaped. Broken. Barely audible. No. Emily. Don't. Naya paused. Emily. Perhaps a wife. Perhaps someone he had lost. Grief often visited people while fever held them between sleep and waking. She dipped a cloth into cool creek water. Laid it gently across his forehead. The fever eased slightly. Just before midnight, Ethan suddenly gasped. His eyes opened. Unfocused. Confused. He tried sitting upright. Pain shot through his shoulder. He collapsed back immediately. Easy. Naya's voice remained calm. You're safe. He blinked several times. Trying to understand where he was. The rough stone walls. The fire. The unfamiliar woman kneeling beside him. His hand instinctively searched for his revolver. It wasn't there. Naya quietly pointed toward the opposite side of the shelter. I unloaded it. It's beside your rifle. His breathing slowed. You found me? She nodded. You fell. You lost a great deal of blood. He looked down at the clean bandage around his leg. Then carefully rotated his shoulder. Pain remained. But the joint no longer felt broken. You put it back. Yes. He stared at her. You know how. My father taught me. Silence filled the shelter. Finally, Ethan looked toward the fire. I thought I was dead. You almost were. She said it gently. Without judgment. Without drama. Simply the truth. He closed his eyes for a moment. Then opened them again. Thank you. Those two words surprised even him. Many people in Cedar Ridge rarely spoke that way to Apache families. Naya simply nodded. You should drink. She lifted a wooden cup toward him. He accepted it carefully. The warm tea carried a bitter taste. What is this? Willow bark. It will help with the pain. He smiled faintly. Tastes terrible. It usually does. For the first time. She smiled too. A small one. Almost impossible to notice. Morning arrived beneath clear blue skies. The mountain looked peaceful again. As though nothing had happened. Ethan attempted standing. The moment his injured leg accepted weight. It buckled. Naya caught him before he fell. You aren't ready. I have to get back. No. I have work. You have stitches. He sighed. You sound like an army doctor. My father sounded the same. He looked at her more carefully. You've done this before. Many times. On settlers? On anyone who was hurt. That answer lingered. Long after she returned to preparing breakfast. For the next 2 days. Recovery became their routine. Naya changed Ethan's bandages every morning. She taught him how to recognize clean spring water. How to identify poisonous plants. How to notice when birds suddenly stopped singing. The forest warns you. If you know where to listen. Ethan listened. Not only to the woods. To her. One afternoon. While sitting outside the cabin. He finally asked the question that had stayed in his mind. Why didn't you leave me? She continued sharpening a small hunting knife. Because you were alive. You didn't know me. I didn't need to. He lowered his eyes. In town. Not everyone treats your people fairly. I know. So why save one of us? Naya looked toward the mountains. My father believed healing loses its meaning. If we decide who deserves it. Ethan had no answer. Only silence. A silence filled with respect. Then. Hoofbeats echoed through the valley. Fast. Several riders. Voices followed. There. I see the cabin. 3 armed men from Cedar Ridge emerged between the pines. The first thing they noticed was Ethan standing outside an Apache woman's cabin. The second was the rifle leaning against the porch. One rider immediately pulled his revolver. His eyes narrowed. What the hell happened here? Another pointed directly at Naya. Step away from him. We don't know what you've done. Naya didn't move. She simply stood still. Before she could speak. Ethan limped forward. Slowly. Painfully. Then placed himself directly between Naya and the barrels of 3 loaded guns. Ethan stood between Naya and 3 loaded revolvers. His injured leg trembled beneath him. His shoulder still ached with every breath. But he didn't step aside. The tallest rider narrowed his eyes. Ethan. Move. We're taking her into town. Ethan's voice remained calm. No. The man frowned. She could have robbed you. No. She could have dragged you here after attacking you. No. Another rider pointed toward the cabin. Then explain why you're in an Apache woman's home. Ethan slowly looked back at Naya. Then faced the men again. Because. She kept me alive. Silence settled over the clearing. The riders exchanged uncertain glances. Ethan continued. I lost too much blood. My shoulder was dislocated. I would have frozen before sunrise. He pointed toward the handmade rescue sled resting beside the cabin. See that? She built it herself. She dragged me nearly 4 miles through the mountains. One of the men climbed off his horse. He walked toward the sled. The rough pine poles still showed fresh rope marks. Blood stained the blanket stretched across the frame. The man looked back at Ethan. You mean? She pulled you all that way? Ethan nodded. Alone. The men said nothing. For the first time. They truly looked at Naya. Not as a stranger. Not as an Apache woman. But as the person standing between Ethan and death. Sheriff Owen Carter arrived less than an hour later. Unlike the others. He didn't begin by asking questions. He began by examining Ethan. The sheriff had served as an army medic during the war years before settling in Arizona. He carefully removed the bandage around Ethan's leg. His experienced eyes widened. The wound had been cleaned perfectly. The bleeding had stopped. No sign of infection. He gently tested Ethan's shoulder. The joint sat exactly where it belonged. He looked toward Naya. You reduced this? Yes. Without breaking the collarbone? She nodded. The sheriff stared another moment before smiling quietly. That's not luck. That's skill. One rider spoke up. Shouldn't Doc Harper look at him first? Sheriff Carter answered without taking his eyes off the bandage. Doc Harper can. But I already know what he'll say. He stood. If this wound hadn't been cleaned immediately. If the bleeding hadn't been controlled. If that shoulder hadn't been reset. Ethan would have died long before anyone found him. He paused. Then added something no one expected. This woman saved his life. No one argued. Because no one could. By late afternoon. Everyone returned to Cedar Ridge. Word traveled faster than wagons. By the time Ethan reached Main Street, nearly half the town had gathered. Some came out of curiosity. Others because they genuinely believed they were about to witness an arrest. Instead, they watched Ethan climb slowly onto the wooden boardwalk. He leaned heavily on his walking stick. Every step reminded him how close he had come to dying. Dr. Samuel Harper examined the injuries once more inside his clinic. When he finished, he walked outside to address the waiting crowd. I've practiced medicine for 23 years. I've treated railroad accidents, mining explosions, cavalry injuries. He glanced toward Naya. Whoever treated Mr. Walker understood exactly what they were doing. Several people looked surprised. The doctor continued. The shoulder was reduced correctly. The wound was cleaned before infection could begin. The pressure bandage prevented fatal blood loss. He smiled faintly. I couldn't have improved the work. The crowd fell silent. Mrs. Evelyn Harper stepped toward Naya first. My grandson still talks about the fever medicine you made last winter. Naya smiled politely. I remember him. He likes fishing. Mrs. Harper laughed. Softly. He certainly does. One by one, others began speaking. Not because prejudice vanished overnight. Because truth had become impossible to ignore. Over the following weeks, something quietly changed inside Cedar Ridge. People still visited Dr. Harper. But when ranch hands were injured miles from town, someone inevitably said, go find Naya. Parents brought children suffering from snake bites. Broken wrists. High fevers. Deep cuts from ranch work. Naya never advertised her knowledge. She simply continued helping whoever knocked on her door. One afternoon, Sheriff Carter arrived carrying rolled blueprints beneath his arm. We've got an empty building beside the livery stable. He spread the papers across her table. The town council wants to turn it into a first aid station. Naya looked surprised. For travelers. For ranchers. For anyone hurt before reaching the doctor's office. He smiled. They asked if you'd be willing to run it. She remained quiet. Not because she lacked an answer. Because she never imagined hearing those words. Years earlier, many of these same people refused to meet her eyes. Now, they trusted her with their lives. I don't work alone. She finally said. Sheriff Carter nodded. I was hoping you'd say that. The following morning, Dr. Harper walked through the front door carrying several wooden crates. Glass bottles. Medical instruments. Fresh bandages. He placed them on the table. I know medicine. He smiled warmly. You know these mountains. Seems foolish not to learn from each other. For the first time, two different traditions stood side by side. Not competing. Working together. Summer arrived across Eagle Creek. Wildflowers covered the valley. Children often gathered outside the new first aid station. Some wanted to hear stories. Others wanted to learn. Naya showed them how to recognize clean drinking water. How to stop bleeding with pressure instead of panic. How to splint an injured arm using nothing more than straight branches and cloth. Ethan often stood nearby. Sometimes helping. Mostly watching. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight painted the mountains gold, he walked with Naya back toward the place where they had first met. The broken branches still lay beneath the cliff. The trail looked peaceful now. Almost ordinary. Ethan stopped. From inside his saddlebag, he removed a small wooden plaque. Simple. Hand-carved. He knelt beside the trail. Then secured it to a weathered pine tree. The carving read, "A stranger became my rescuer here. May everyone who walks these mountains remember that compassion has no tribe." Naya read the words quietly. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Ethan turned toward her. "When I left town that morning, I thought I was hunting a mountain lion." He smiled softly. "I had no idea I'd find the person who would change my life." Naya looked toward the flowing creek. "My father used to say, people enter our lives the same way rivers enter a valley. They don't ask permission. They simply find the path they were meant to follow." Ethan extended his hand. Not to rescue her. Not to lead her. Only to walk beside her. After a brief moment, she placed her hand gently in his. Together, they continued down the mountain trail. Behind them, the evening breeze carried the scent of pine through Eagle Creek. Ahead, Cedar Ridge waited. No longer divided by fear, but slowly united by something stronger. Respect. Hope. And the quiet courage of one Apache woman who never asked who deserved to be saved before choosing to save them.